It's Wonder Woman 1984 day. Time to get ready and transform! Oh god, why would I even have that be the transformation sequence? Oh god, I feel awful. Oh, that was more, that was awful. Oh, I hope Wonder Woman 1984 makes me feel better. Oh, this was not good. Wonder Woman 1984 is not a good movie. In fact, it's a bad movie. Like, as bad as my childhood home movie's bad.
Everybody wants a thrill.
I didn't realize we had a clip of that. Yeah, nothing's actually that bad. But even beyond simple quality, for me, I find it to actually be a deeply troubling film in a way that I didn't expect. For a film that purports to be empowering of women, for me, it not only fails to do that, but by refusing to actually critically engage with its own themes and real-world issues, it ends up being actively encouraging of a womanhood and ideal of feminism that ends up being hollow, unrealistic, and ultimately harmful. Now, before I get into all of that, I want to make clear that this was not the video that I really wanted to make. I had planned on doing a video on this movie well before it came out, anticipating and hoping that it would just be me expressing my adoration for the film, as well as Gal Gadot's amazing wardrobe. And at least that last part I can still do, because the costuming department on this film was on point. I live for Chris Pine in a fanny pack. That's probably why Star Trek Into Darkness wasn't as good, not as much Chris Pine fanny pack. But as many of you know, I'm a huge DC Comics fan, even more so than Marvel. I mean, I have seen literally every single episode of every Arrowverse show on the CW and the DC Universe shows. I even subscribe to DC Universe. I've watched most of the DC animated shows and own a shit ton of the comics and have, I kid you not, seen every single DC Comics movie, animated or live action. And I mean every single one, even the DC Superhero Girl ones. I've seen Steel twice. No one should see Steel twice. Not even Shaq has probably seen Steel twice. Hell, I even watched Pennyworth. I bet you didn't even know that was a show. And while I think the DCU franchise films could have gone better from the start, I've been loving the direction of the franchise so far in the recent films, especially after Birds of Prey, which was easily one of my favorite movies of 2020. And the original Wonder Woman movie is one of my favorite superhero films too. It not only managed to be a revelation for women in big budget superhero films, but decently engaged with the theme of the moral ambiguity of war and human conflict, albeit in a glossy blockbuster kind of way. I'm even one of those weirdos that actually likes that film's third act. I just wish that instead of Steve Trevor's death motivating Diana to defeat Ares, Diana should have beaten Ares, then Steve Trevor should have died, showing that even if you beat the bad guy, you can't stop loss and pain caused by war and its effects. Sorry, I'm getting really sidetracked here because I really do not want to talk about Wonder Woman 1984. Because, you see, I say all of this because I want you to know that I was so here for Wonder Woman 1984, especially with Patty Jenkins, a director I love, not being shackled to whatever Zack Snyder was trying to do with his Ayn Randian nightmare universe. Not only that, it was coming out on Christmas, like a wonderful warm gift to unwrap as a reward for finishing the hellish year that was 2020. But like 2020 in general, watching Wonder Woman 1984 wasn't so much like opening a Christmas gift as it was a strange and surprising endurance test that I did not sign up for. Watching this film felt like that time on Christmas where you're stuck alone driving to a boring church service with your talkative, judgmental grandma who asks just a bit too many personal questions about your recent gender confirmation vaginoplasty surgery. An experience that you desperately wished you could escape, but sadly realized that you simply must survive. That might have gotten a little bit too oddly specific. Anyways, I don't like being a negative person. I like making videos about the things that excite me or move me. So I almost decided to just not make this video at all on Wonder Woman 1984. But the more I thought about it, the more this film sort of stuck with me, the more I realized I had a lot to say. Because to me, while I believe this film has some disturbing moral implications, I think its failures provide an interesting jumping off point in how shallow depictions of female icons and feminist empowerment can actually be unintentionally harmful. And because of that, this will allow me to make this video be productive rather than just a rant about something that I dislike, because heaven knows that YouTube doesn't need more of that type of content. Oh, and yeah, I am going to go full Shijoa on this this thing, so be prepared for that. So before we dive in, I just want to make clear, while I am going to be highly critical of this film, I am not condemning the filmmakers. I like Patty Jenkins, everyone has off films, especially ones that were made within a studio system with tons of chefs in the kitchen, as this film reportedly had. I'm also going to talk about some of the positives of this film, because there are some. This discussion isn't part of that annoyingly reductive faux culture war that so many in YouTube need every single piece of geek culture to fit into. That's lazy film criticism that actually ignores nuanced conversation and critical engagement with a work. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to be mostly focusing on the moral and philosophical and ethical implications of this film, not the bonkers plot developments that happens and the complete lack of logic throughout the entirety of the film. If you want some discussions of that, I'll recommend some videos in the down below that you could watch for some just discussions of the baffling choices in this movie. But if I had focused on them here, this video would have been like 3 hours long, as it almost was. I actually wrote like 4 pages of a script that I did not include in this video because I was just ranting at that point about the complete lack of logic in this movie.
I want to be number one. An apex predator.
I wanna be the very best, like no one ever was.
And finally, if you entirely disagree with me and you loved Wonder Woman 1984 and it inspired you or moved you or excited you, that is so awesome. Good critical conversations never happen in a vacuum, and I want to hear your thoughts. I just hope that this video makes you think about the issues surrounding the film, at least the ones that interested me. And with that all said, let's get into Wonder Woman 1984.
Yeah. That's right. Get used to it.
So let's start off like Wonder Woman 1984 did, with the positives, because the positives of this film actually highlight the later flaws within it. The film's first 15 minutes are wonderful. Returning to Themyscira's society of diverse warrior women just living their best warrior women life on a beautiful island still feels, perhaps a little sadly, fresh and new. And by the way, Robin Wright is just so goddamn attractive. Y'all know this little bisexual YouTuber has a thing for women who could totally beat me up. See Furiosa and Starbug. Excuse me. Anyways, I love the visual inventiveness of this opening sequence as well. I have no idea what's happening, but if all sports were like this, I would actually watch sports. And I will say, the film does a wonderful job throughout its entire runtime of being incredibly creative and campy with its action sequences. A consistent positive, even if the CGI work doesn't hold up from time to time. And the opening does also function as a great reintroduction to Diana. Her tenacity, her sometimes unbecoming but somewhat earned arrogance, and her exceptionalism, even among exceptional women. The opening also just has that right kind of campiness for a film that is intentionally evoking 1980s cinema and Silver Age comics. It also sets up a strong theme for the film going forward, that cheating isn't the right way to win.
You cheated, Diana. That is the truth.
It's something that we will be talking about later, how that theme actually plays out, but I like how it's set up here. These first few minutes are everything that I hoped Wonder Woman 1984 would be. A campy yet sincere, visually inventive film with a strong message delivered through an oft underrepresented feminine lens. It all just works. And that energy carries into the very next scene with Wonder Woman going around in 1984 and just saving folks. It's just super sweet, and it's honestly something we needed more of in the DC film universe. Just heroes being heroes. Part of the reason why Zack Snyder's Superman doesn't work is he's just so damn dour and depressing, even when he's saving people. Like, not exactly inspiring hero stuff. Man, I just saved a bunch of people from a fire, better look depressed. Is this Superman just immune to a goddamn smile? Oh god, not like that! I don't mind dark and gritty storytelling. I love The Expanse, for example. But you can't tell me that Superman is a hero that inspires everyone in this universe. You have to show me that. And 1984 does that with its heroine. Diana just enjoys her work, and you get the feeling that people honestly are inspired by her. I mean, look at this little girl, it's just so wonderful. And it just manages to hit that campy tone just perfectly right, with Wonder Woman using her tiara as a batarang and Breaking Guns saying things like this.
I hate guns.
This is the hero we deserve, Batfleck. These two opening scenes are the best part of the movie, and it just baffles me that Warner Brothers apparently wanted to cut these two scenes out and Patty Jenkins had to fight for them, which goes to show you where a lot of the problems that I have with this film later on may be coming from, but that's just speculation. But sadly, we have to move on, because as the movie's plot progressed and things got further and further into the story, the more the entire film made me feel not only confused, but deeply uncomfortable with its choices. At the start of Wonder Woman 1984, we learn that despite it being 70 years since Steve Trevor's death, Diana has been holding a candle for Steve ever since. Not only that, but her entire apartment is like some creepy shrine to Steve Trevor, as if she has nothing else going on in her life. She even gets sad brunches so she can stare longingly at planes flying overhead. I'm sorry, this is what got me. I don't know why I was hung up on this, but she stares longingly at planes. Like, because Steve Trevor was a pilot, get it? Like, does every single time a plane passes overhead during her day, does she just get wistful? Whenever she's sad, she just gets on a motorcycle and just drives down to the airport and just longingly stares at airstrips. It's just a bizarre choice to have her, like, wistful about planes. But this highlights the problem. It's been 70 years. You're telling me that Diana formed no other relationships in that time, that she's got nothing else going on? She works at a dang museum. You're telling me she didn't have to network to get that kind of amazing job? And you're telling me that the kind, empathetic Diana made zero friends? This lady seems like she's the person that would totally invite you to that, like, awkward after-work hangout with a bunch of your coworkers, and Diana never took anyone up on that? No, I'm sorry, I have to go back to my room and stare sadly at my picture of Steve Trevor. And what about Themyscira, the family she left, the family that is still alive, by the way, and was set up at the beginning of the film? She has no desire to reform relationships with the women she grew up with. We even have a good setup for this, as we later learn that Diana has been looking her entire life for this ancient warrior's armor from Themyscira's past. You could have used that to show that she was trying to find connections with the world she's not a part of anymore, trying to find a connection with Themyscira. But nah, that armor is just set up for her having a pretty outfit at the end of the film and a cameo after the credits. And it's the armor that Cheetah instantly destroys in 2 seconds, despite it apparently having kept the entire world at bay. Glad that plot point went somewhere. But this Steve obsession not only is a plot problem, but it diminishes Diana as a character, because it means this powerful Amazonian woman is in a state of arrested development for an entire lifetime because a single man hasn't been in her life. And don't get me wrong, I would be upset if Chris Pine died too. I have definitely imagined myself being the Orion girl in Star Trek 2009, so I totally get it. He's a top tier Chris. I'm also not saying that women can't have important relationships with a man, but that it shouldn't define them solely. Diana has so much in her life, yet doesn't seem to care about it at all. This story beat is especially weird because the entire plot of the very last DCEU movie, Birds of Prey, was about a woman, Harley Quinn, being able to find identity outside of a single male relationship and define herself by other, oft female relationships. We go from that story to a story where the world's most powerful woman has completely defined her life by a man who isn't even around anymore, despite her having an amazing job, powers, and a wardrobe that I would literally murder someone for. Like, honestly, my wardrobe looks like it was curated by Miss Frizzle. Girl, you got stuff going on. I'm not saying Wonder Woman can't love a man or be hung up on a man. Not every empowering feminist film has to eschew men. I mean, see the first Wonder Woman film for the lovely relationship between Diana and Steve that is there. But having Diana's soul-defining feature being that she's pining after Pine sucks the independence and inner strength she exudes in all of her other films, something she even had in Batman v Superman and Justice League, even considering Zack Snyder's weird treatment of women in those films. And I would hope that the reason why this is a problem, not just for the character but for representation of women in general, would be obvious. But in brief, women throughout film history and all fiction in general are often solely defined and characterized by their relationship to men in the story. It's a reflection of how in real life women are often seen as needing to exist in a secondary place to men and for men. There's a reason that the Bechdel test, which is meant as a low bar for writing female characters, not the average, is just having two women talk about someone who isn't a guy. Again, not to say women can't or shouldn't talk about men or have men in their life, but to have Wonder Woman, who has come to be seen as a beacon of female strength and independence, be so singularly and ridiculously encapsulated by a male relationship, sadly reinforces this idea that even the strongest women need and require a strong male relationship in order to have a fulfilling life. So what I'm saying is, every woman should be a lesbian. Not really, but I'm sure someone took this that way. But I don't just want to focus on womanhood in this film, so let's talk about Steve Trevor. The plot of Wonder Woman 1984 revolves around a magical wishing rock that turns out to be a monkey's paw. You get a wish granted, but it also takes something most valuable away from you. And I gotta say, by the way, I love the wishing rock. Again, it's a perfectly campy Silver Age comic book idea for this movie. I adore that we live in an age where some scriptwriter can walk into a film executive's office and say, I want to make a movie about a magic wishing rock. And that executive is basically that Futurama meme.
Shut up and take my money!
But in the film, Diana unintentionally uses the rock to wish Steve Trevor back to life, which, despite my problems with how defined she is by Steve as a character, this beat works for me. I too would wish for more Chris Pine. But instead of Steve Trevor just coming back to life, we get another baffling choice. Steve Trevor comes back, but in the body of a pre-existing and completely other man. Within the film, I have no idea why this choice was made. I can't imagine Diana's wish was, I wish Steve Trevor would come back in the body of that guy from Hallmark movies. Not only that, but how the film decides to convey this information that Steve is in another person's body is incredibly confusing. We see this guy first, then the camera turns around, and then we see Chris Pine. And the film's not entirely clear what happened. Did he just transform or what? But we quickly learn that Chris Pine is only there for our benefit, the audience's benefit, which, you know, fair enough, I want to stare at Chris Pine, but everyone else, even Wonder Woman, sees this Hallmark guy. And this is no joke, the actor literally appears in mainly Hallmark movies, and he's literally credited as Handsome Man. Which brings me to issues beyond simply a weird plot event, because this story choice brings up more concerning issues. First and foremost, the film seems to only be valuing this guy for his hotness. Something that the film repeatedly points out is bad when we do it to women.
Anything else I can get you? Coffee? Tea? Me?
I don't need anything from you and I'm done.
But apparently if we do it to a guy, it's just okay. Again, we learn that this man is literally credited as Handsome Man, despite the fact that we learn that he has a whole life. And okay, you think, okay, that's fine. That's the monkey's paw part of the deal, right? That Steve Trevor has somehow taken over this guy's life and has exchanged it for Wonder Woman to have him back in her life. But the characters, and by extension the movie, never seem to give a crap about this guy.
Cleaning his bedroom, but seems to me to be an engineer. Lots of pictures of himself. Not what I would do, but it's each his own.
We are left to question, does he have a life, family, friends who care about him? Who knows, because the film doesn't want us to care about that. And this leads us to some serious issues of bodily consent. Firstly, Steve and Diana endanger this man's life throughout the film with no regard for him. But Diana sleeps and is even implied to have had sex with Steve in this guy's body. How is that even remotely okay? Then at the end of the film, once the guy does get his body back, and apparently no one explained to him what happened to him that week that he just doesn't remember, and apparently the world went insane, Wonder Woman has just a meet cute with this guy. Like, I don't know how else to describe the scene. It's literally a weird meet cute. I also don't know why this scene takes place at Christmas when earlier in the film we established that we were around the 4th of July.
4th. Of course.
4th of July?
So, like, apparently Wonder Woman took like 5 months to have an emotional catharsis, but whatever. Now, I get that the film doesn't linger on this and just wants us to have a lighthearted, fun adventure and not worry about Steve being in this guy's body. But that's what bothers me, that the film and thereby the filmmakers made this story choice and didn't seem at all interested in actually wrestling with its implications. The choice to have Steve in this man's body adds nothing to the film as it is, and it's honestly just a weird afterthought. If the film had actually done something with this body swap, actually showed us the moral implications of it, like Diana wanting Steve, but Steve not wanting to sacrifice this guy's life, that would have been an interesting choice and one I would have actually enjoyed watching. But no, that doesn't happen, it's just a thing that's there. It honestly just feels like a weird remnant of an earlier draft of the script or reshoots, but even if that's so, that doesn't change the fact that it is in the movie. When most of us think of the idea of bodily consent, we usually think about it for women and women's right to control their bodies, as society starts to understand that women's autonomy is often infringed upon. But the ability to control one's body, regardless of not only gender, but race, sexuality, and anything else about you, is a core principle surrounding pretty much any political discourse, especially within feminist conversations. We all have the right to say what we do with our own bodies, and that's a fight that we've been fighting since, the dawn of time. So it actively bothers me that in a movie that sold itself as being feminist, that we don't even think about the bodily autonomy of this random guy. And it's really gross. And when it comes to the implied sex, there could be arguments made that it could be read as a rape, even if the film doesn't seem to think so. Even if you aren't aware your body was abused, it's still abuse. And I'm not saying that that's what the film is saying or what the filmmakers wanted to say or that was the intention of the scene, but the fact that that reading is possible in this film is the issue, especially because it comes around a man. Often men being raped or losing bodily autonomy in media is played as a laugh, something to snigger at. So much so that even Star Trek did it.
This engineer wanted you to see her planet.
So?
Perhaps the next step would have been to meet her holographic parents. If I'm not mistaken, on some planets, that's a precursor to marriage.
I see you laughing there, Captain Archer. It is most definitely not cool. And this recurring trope with the media that we should find men being harassed or raped humorous can be incredibly emotionally damaging and influence how we view real-life sexual assault and harassment of men. Again, I don't think the film is laughing at this man's loss of autonomy like, Captain Archer was, but neither is it acknowledging it in any meaningful way. It's an unforced error by the film in so many ways, an issue that the film brings up but doesn't seem to have any desire to actually think about. And this inability to actually wrestle with its own implications is a continued kneecap issue with Wonder Woman, as we were going to see. Because we ultimately learn that the monkey's paw trade-off for Diana's wish is not that Steve is in this guy's body, but that she is slowly losing her powers. And that to beat the bad guys at the end of the film, she needs to renounce her wish and let Steve die. Now, to a degree, I do like this plot beat. It leads to some of the strongest points in the film. My favorite scene in the whole movie from a character perspective comes when Diana breaks down and says that she has sacrificed everything and asked for nothing in return and just desperately wants to have Steve back.
I give everything I have every day, and I'm happy to. But this one thing, you're all that I've wanted.
Not only do I personally resonate with that idea, it's something we often see women being asked to do. Women are often seen as saviors, as caregivers, put on this pedestal, and asked to selflessly give of themselves without any needs of their own. Now, this place in society isn't exclusively a feeling for women. Men and anyone else can love being a selfless caregiver, but it's a role often forced upon women whether they want it or not. So it becomes hard for any women, especially those who are told that they need to selflessly care for others at expense for themselves, to ask for anything in their life for themselves. So for Diana to admit that she wants something, that she wants Steve, that she just wants to have this person for herself, this one positive thing in her life, is a strong idea for the film to bring up.
Why, for once, can't I just have this one thing, Steve? This one thing.
But this concept, this idea, is undone by the film itself. Firstly, again, the thing that Diana wants is a relationship. A relationship she could have easily had an ample opportunity to make at any point in the last 70 years with anyone else. But more importantly, the film frames that Diana should be completely and utterly selfless. That she should give up her one desire in order to care for others. And for sure, balancing meaningful personal relationships and being selfless is a common theme of the superhero genre. See films like Spider-Man 2, for example. In that film, the ultimate theme for Spider-Man was that he should take time for himself. Peter learns that he can't be Spider-Man all the time. It's hard, but Peter can be Spider-Man, but it's also just as important for him to have a relationship with other people, specifically Mary Jane. Humans should give of ourselves, but we need to make sure that we recharge and build ourselves up in order to have something to give in the first place. And Spider-Man 3, for all that film's faults, does showcase the other side of this scale. That if you become too selfish and decide you want to do dance montages in the streets, you can lose everything. Again, there is a balance. But in Wonder Woman 1984, Diana is asked to give up Steve, and she does. In fact, the film shames her for wanting anything at all for herself. Remember that theme of cheating that was brought up in the opening of the film? Diana wanting Steve is framed as cheating, as her getting something for nothing. It feels as if the film was trying to critically critique and tie this idea to Diana's isolation at the top of the film, that in order for Diana to be healthy, she should actually put in the work to build healthy relationships.
You're the only joy I've had or even asked for.
I am so sorry. But that's crazy.
But that idea is also undone by her lack of any meaningful positive relationships anywhere else in the film outside of Steve. I've already pointed out the film's problems with how it's framed handsome man. In fact, the one relationship that Diana does try to form on her own is shown to be shallow and horribly toxic. And here's where we get to the cheetah of it all. Cheetah. Don't know why I did that. Thought it would be funny? You tell me. Diana reaches out to one of her coworkers, Kristen Wiig, and they actually go out for a wonderful brunch that doesn't revolve around staring longingly at planes. But instead of this being a chance for Diana to actually grow a relationship for once, it's instead played as a scene where Cheetah just becomes jealous of Diana.
You just seem like you'd be really popular. And I would know because I've never been popular.
There's no meaningful connection between the two of them, it's just there to set up Cheetah's jealousy arc later on. And more on that in a little bit. But at the end of the movie, when Diana begs Cheetah to renounce her wish because she was a good person, that whole idea rings as hollow. Like, what do you know about Cheetah, Diana? And this attempt to reach out to her ends up failing, and Cheetah just keeps on fighting Diana because, yeah, why wouldn't she? Diana doesn't know her or care about her and has never formed a meaningful relationship with her in any way. So in the end, Diana is shamed for wanting to have a relationship with Steve Trevor because it's cheating, but when the film actually has a chance to show us a healthy way for her to build relationships as an alternative, it's actually shown as more toxic and shallow than her relationship with Steve ever was. Her relationship with Steve is actually shown to be warm, affirming, and productive. In fact, the film seems to reinforce how wholesome and positive Diana's relationship with Steve actually is, because it's through her connection with Steve that she learns how to fly. The film has this weird message where it's saying that her relationship with Steve is somehow cheating, and yet it also is what gives her her own sense of power. And the relationship she does try to form organically with Cheetah is awful. This storyline could have been something powerful, intelligently combining the idea that women often don't get the chance to have things for themselves, are told not to take anything for themselves, but that we also have to put in the work to have those meaningful relationships in our life. But ultimately, film just makes it a muddled mess. And also the flying looks really weird. Did anyone else feel that her flying just looked strange? Speaking of weird choices too, while I actually loved the acting in the moment where Diana renounces her wish to Steve, the filmmakers still managed to make that scene weird by having Steve's voice be creepily loud from behind the pillar.
I'll always love you, Diana, no matter where I am.
It's oddly, creepy and unnerving. Speaking of weird choices though, let's talk about Maxwell Lord and the magic wishing rock. First off, Pedro Pascal is clearly having the time of his life in this role, and I am so here for it.
I'm a forgiving man!
And Maxwell Lord is one of the stronger aspects of the film. A failed television con man who promises people grand wishes that come with sinister trade-offs that people don't realize when they accept the wish, that just create violence and chaos around the entire United States and the world. Nope, I can sense no hidden meanings there. Yes, clearly I enjoy the fact that he is meant to evoke Donald Trump, but what I also enjoy is that he's not a one-to-one parallel. He's not saying, let's make DC movies great again. It allows him to stand for much more symbolically than as a simple direct allegory. And don't get me wrong, I don't mind direct allegory, but here I like that it works symbolically for him. In fact, I found his entire humanization through his earnest desire to be a winner for his son to be honestly endearing.
Well, it takes time to become a great #1 man like your dad is going to be.
I'm betting Don Jr. never feels that love. Lord has internalized the belief that being a strong man means being a winner, and it is what blinds him from having a meaningful relationship to his son. This idea continues the relationship theme of the rest of the film, and it's a great criticism of toxic masculinity. Oh, I said it! I said toxic masculinity. Everyone make sure to fill out that space on your SJW bingo card. But truly, this plot between Lord and his son does show how the need to constantly be tough closes you off from actually connecting with others. That you don't allow yourself to show your emotions or who you are to even those closest to you because you need to be seen as successful, a true man. And in this pursuit of being tough, Maxwell Lord actually wishes to be the wishing rock. And again, this is a great development. It's one of those oddball campy choices that actually feels earned and intentional because it matches Lord's characterization and the themes of selflessness and selfishness of the rest of the film. Maxwell gives you what you want but takes what actually matters to you in that pursuit. Not only that, Maxwell constantly granting wishes takes a physical toll on him as well, as also distancing himself from being a healthy father. Again, giving too much of yourself without actually building healthy relationships comes into play as a theme in Maxwell Lord's story and works much better than it does in Diana's. Yet despite this being one of the film's strong aspects, even this theme gets muddled. The film doesn't seem to be completely sure what it has to say about the characterization of Maxwell. In the film's climax, we are shown a montage of sequences displaying that Maxwell used to be poor and trying to characterize him as someone that we should have empathy for, and it's also why he has desire to become rich. Now, greed needs no motivating factor. We didn't need to see this backstory to understand that Maxwell Lord was greedy. And it also entirely kills the momentum of the climax, as it's completely tangential to how the film is actually trying to redeem Maxwell at the end, through his son. And as my friend and fellow YouTuber Council of Geeks pointed out, there's actually something more sinister here. Because the fact that Max used to be poor and is failing at being rich weirdly implies that it's not rich people who take advantage of lower class people's desires for their own ends and cause chaos, but it's actually poor people who just don't know how to be rich. To which I say, no. No. I'm not going to get into one of my leftist let's eat the rich rants, but yeah, That is not how that works. And I don't think that was the intention of the writers to imply that. I think they just wanted to humanize Maxwell, but it was just unnecessary, especially in the climax, and comes with those unfortunate implications. I don't mind him being redeemed, by the way, at all, especially since he's not a one-to-one parallel for Trump, which makes it easier for me to take him as a fictional character being redeemed, instead of a film asking us to forgive a real-life man who has done real-life harm, something that the film has not earned the right to ask of us. Instead, I enjoy that Lord's arc completes when he realizes that he doesn't need to be successful or tough in order to be a good father to his son.
In fact, I'm a pretty messed up loser guy.
However, swinging back to the bad though, it is still a hard pill to swallow that he faces zero repercussions for the damages he caused. I mean, the Secret Service literally flies him to find his son in a field somewhere at the end of the movie. So he still has Secret Service protection despite everything that he has done. Isn't the point of a superhero film that we can actually hold villains like this accountable? I would even be fine if the film tried to show Wonder Woman trying to hold Lord accountable, but failing, mirroring how rich folks get away with doing large-scale harm even in the real world. But again, the film just ignores this altogether. Wonder Woman just lets him be redeemed and fly away and doesn't seem to care about following up on that. Consistently, the film fails to follow through, partially because it's unsure what it wants to say, and partially because it doesn't want to say anything too harshly. Which brings us to the even bigger issue. Let's talk about some of the wishes that are portrayed in the film. At the end of the movie, when Maxwell Lord is granting a ton of wishes all around the world, one of the wishes that we are shown is this one.
I wish all you Irish bastards would get sent back to where you came from!
What the Like, I get it, the world is descending into anarchy and they're trying to show us an escalation of the chaosness of the wishes. But why do that by showing us a wish that highlights very real prejudice and evokes imagery of people being rounded up and beaten by police? Something all too sensitive even before the hellscape that's been 2020. This is made even worse when the wishes surrounding this one are shown to be kind of cartoonish. The one before it was a woman wishing to be famous, and then the one after it is this over-the-top 1980s campy vibe of 1 billion nuclear missiles going off. It makes the glib choice to show prejudice against the Irish as equally cartoonish as those two things, which it is not. Irish people, especially in America, have also had a history of being racially discriminated against. It reads like the film trying to have one of those dark and gritty moments from Snyder's Batman v Superman without actually understanding how terrifying this actually is for some people. And I'm not against superhero films tackling this type of subject matter. In fact, I think more superhero movies should tackle stuff like this. The X-Men films, for example, use the horrors of the Holocaust to highlight the overall film's ideas of genocide and prejudice. But those scenes set in the Holocaust are given appropriate weight and time by the film. Wonder Woman 1984, in contrast, instead uses the prejudice and discrimination of people flippantly. It also just ruins the campy vibe that the film was trying to set up. I mean, after I saw this scene, I couldn't help but thinking, okay, so you're telling me that no KKK bigot or racist person wished something truly horrific while Lord was granting all those wishes? I just couldn't get over that fact that that was probably happening somewhere in this world. And by the way, we are shown at the end of the film that everyone still has their memories of the chaos of that day. It wasn't wiped from their mind. So apparently, all the Irish folks still have memories that the entire country that they lived in just started rounding them up and deporting them without due process, even if it only lasted an hour or so. Speaking of which, that's not the only wish that evokes racist stereotypes, segregation, and cultural genocide in the movie. The film's second act takes us to Cairo, Egypt, when Maxwell Lord goes to visit the new king of crude, Emir Saad bin Abdidos. Apologies if I am mispronouncing that, I am not good with name pronunciations. But how is Emir portrayed in the film? I mean, he literally looks like a stereotypical Orientalist painting from the 1500s, and I'm not from that cultural background, so I'm not here to get offended for anybody, but from what I've read, many folks of Egyptian descent found this depiction incredibly problematic, and it's made even worse by the fact that the wish Emir gives to Maxwell Lord is, well, this.
All of my land to be returned. My ancestral realm, the Bialian dynasty. And for all the heathens who dare trod upon it, to be kept out forever, so that its glory may be renewed.
So the guy is basically trying to do a cultural genocide, or segregation at the very least, by throwing Arabs of a certain descent out of his country. And we are shown this as a giant magical border wall. Okay. So I get it. The film is trying to say, big racist wall. Look, it's like Trump. But that's about all it says. But placing this oversimplified viewpoint within the Middle Eastern context ignores that it's not a one-to-one parallel between what's happening at the Mexican border in the United States and the intricacies of Middle Eastern prejudice and violence. And it's also made even more awkward given the controversy surrounding Gal Gadot, who was a member of the Israeli military and has spoken publicly about her support for the continued use of violence in the Middle East. Not to mentioning the boycott of the first Wonder Woman film by many countries throughout the Middle East, presumably because of Gadot's Israeli support, but also could be seen as simply an anti-Semitic reaction to her background as a Jewish woman. Again, as someone who does not know a ton about Middle Eastern politics, I am not the person to be jumping into these issues, and I'm not necessarily here to moralize or say I'm for or against specific Middle Eastern policies or governments. But that's also kind of my point. The film isn't interested in doing any of that either. You don't get to use racist stereotypes and evoke real-world violence and genocide to make a shallow statement as racism and border walls and Trump are bad. If you don't have the desire to actually talk about the cultures that you're evoking in your film, and indeed use offensive shorthands in order to display that culture, especially when you know your film is already a hot-button issue in those exact places, then you should not bring up those issues. Both the Middle Eastern and Irish wishes in this film just feel like the movie's feeble attempts at gesturing towards actual issues going on today, but it never actually wants to meaningfully engage with them in any critical way. When we have superhero content today like The Boys, which addresses how American imperialism and values have affected the Middle East, or things like Black Panther or the recent HBO Watchmen series dealing with issues of racial strife, this kind of shallow, muddled gesture in Wonder Woman 1984 really does not cut it anymore. Your film needs to do and say more than just point at stuff and say, yeah, that exists, and isn't that bad? Because if you do that, you just end up with the mess that is this movie, with its lack of willingness to engage with the topics it brings up, leading to the film having worse implications or misinterpretations. Again, this is consistent throughout the entire film, from the film not wanting to engage with the fact that Steve Trevor is in another man's body, to talking about classist politics with Maxwell Lord, or even more importantly, to the Irish and Middle Eastern wishes and segments of the film. It not only comes across as ignorant and lazy, but as arrogant, callous, and pompous, especially in the cases of the wishes. Which brings me finally back to Cheetah, because I think Kristen Wiig's character embodies the entire problem with this movie. Kristen Wiig's story arc reads like a lukewarm version of Catwoman in Batman Returns, or Riddler in Batman Forever, or even more specifically, Electro in Amazing Spider-Man 2. She's an underappreciated woman who idolizes our hero and wishes to be like them. But when Cheetah gets the superhero powers, she uses them badly. Where Wonder Woman is self-sacrificing, Cheetah is selfish. Again, there is a core idea here that is meaningful and nuanced, a discussion of how it's important not to build up just for yourself, but for others. How women in any minority group only get further when they work alongside each other rather than fighting each other to get on top. That we should come together in our fight rather than fighting each other. That's a really, really important idea. But how is that shown within the film? Cheetah and Wonder Woman build no meaningful relationship between each other. They're just shown to have a quick, perfunctory, and shallow one, just barely enough to pass the Bechdel test. Instead, we are shown this idea through both of these women's relationships and interactions with men. Cheetah gets empowered by feeling sexy at work by all the men ogling her, and she is tricked by Maxwell Lord because he finally notices and hits on her. And when men sexistly hit on Cheetah, she beats the crap out of them, punching them and maybe even killing them, though the film doesn't actually let us know if she killed this guy or not. This is shown to be bad, and it kind of is, but she does also have a point. Like, it's not a bad thing to get empowered by being sexy, or a bad thing to want to tell men to fuck off when they're being sexist towards you. Yes, she takes it too far, but the film never actually addresses that nuance. And we are meant to contrast this with Wonder Woman, someone who takes all that sexism on the chin and doesn't let it bother her. She just ignores it. She doesn't fight it. She just says, ugh, how silly.
I've had my eyes on you for some time, so if you ever need
That's great, Carl.
At the end of the day, she's above all the riffraff. And so in the end, Diana and Cheetah are framed as ideologically opposing. Diana isn't even able to convince Cheetah of her wrongdoing. But wouldn't it have been more powerful to show their friendship actually build, and have Diana actually be able to reach Cheetah at the end of the story, to show that building strong, truthful relationships with each other, with other women, is actually the path to empowerment? But instead, we get Diana framed as the embodiment of selflessness and Cheetah as selfish. The film sends the message that women need to be endlessly self-sacrificing, superior, and flawless, rather than being flawed, yet made more powerful by engaging with the world and those around them. This is ultimately the problem with Wonder Woman 1984. It's just the veneer of feminism without actually engaging with what feminism means. Feminism isn't about saying women are powerful if they can just exist over all the sexism and problems in the world. Don't get me wrong, the idea of Themyscira is powerful for that exact reason, because it shows us a place where women get to exist without the moral uncertitude, injustice, and sexism of the real world. And that's nice. I want to have that utopia. It's a nice goal to aim for. But when you take Wonder Woman out of Themyscira and put her into the real world, you have to have the movie engage with real world issues. You can't have the character be a distant, cold, and aloof symbolic figure. True feminism means actually engaging with the problems around you and actually engaging with the world. And this is a problem we see with a lot of feminist films that fail to be inclusive of women beyond those of a certain type of privilege, usually tied to their skin color. It's how we get the idea of white feminism. And I'm not necessarily saying Diana is white. We could talk about, Jewish people's access to whiteness, but certainly the idea that women like Diana, who are well off and not tied to any meaningful connection or issues of the world around them, don't have to be anything more than pillars of selfless strength. They provide the blandest possible protagonist, hoping that all women will just be able to identify into this symbolic figure because, hey look, women can be powerful too. But real representation is actually critically engaging with problems that real people actually have to deal with. And it's why films like Black Panther were so celebrated, because that movie gave us a flawed protagonist who was forced by the story's villain to actually look at the problems of the world around him and actually see how he couldn't stay distant and aloof. T'Challa in Black Panther learned that he couldn't just be an absent ruler hiding behind an invisible wall, that he actually had to try and stop what was going on in the world around him, that he had a responsibility to do so and a desire to do so, an earnest desire to do so. That's what that story was all about. Black Panther still gave us a celebration of black culture and African culture in a way that no movie had had before. But it also said that it's not just about celebrating these cultures and these types of identities, it's about saying something meaningful with them too, and saying something unique to those identities, and actually saying something about the world that we live in. Especially as the superhero film genre grows, that needs to be what's happening. But in Wonder Woman 1984, Diana just builds her own Themyscira of one within the real world. She's a woman alone and above it all and not willing to engage. And compare Wonder Woman 1984 to my favorite DCEU film, Birds of Prey. A film that, while certainly not for everyone and definitely flawed, actually worked to critically engage with not only the issues of being a woman, but womanhood from multiple perspectives and identities. The film actually brings up and actually engages with issues of toxic masculinity, imperialism, cultural appropriation, and does so in a much stronger way in its limited single city scope than Wonder Woman does with its entire globe-trotting and heavily political plot. Harley Quinn in that movie isn't above it all, she can't be. Harley lives in a small apartment and has to pay the rent. She's recovering from an abusive relationship. And her fellow Birds of Prey are dealing with issues of the police, employment, depression, abusive men in power, and even more. Yet they manage to make themselves stronger by reaching out to each other rather than taking on the world alone. And I did a whole video on why I love Birds of Prey and why I think it's a really important and inclusive feminist film. Even Marvel's Captain Marvel, which I didn't love and think is kind of just an okay film, at least attempted to showcase the connection between how women are treated and real world issues of oppression, radicalization, and discrimination. And that it's about building strong connections and coalitions and communities with those who share your struggles across identities that makes us stronger. It's why the twist of actually having the Skrulls actually be the marginalized group in that movie makes it so memorable and stronger than it would have been otherwise if Captain Marvel had just taken on the world on her own. No, she works with the Skrull to build something bigger than just herself. She doesn't just take on the world on her own, even though she probably could. But Wonder Woman never actually does this. The Wonder Woman of Wonder Woman 1984 isn't aspirational. She's an unachievable dream, and as a result puts unrealistic expectations and burdens onto women that we can never actually achieve in the real world. And this lack of inclusiveness and engaging with other identities, by the way, is not just a problem within the film itself. It was a problem outside of the film. There is a reason that the film had such positive reviews and a certified fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes before it came out on Christmas. Because the screeners that were given out to reviewers before the film came out were mostly given to male reviewers who gave the film a higher rating.
But when you look at the number of reviews that came in by date, only 76 of the film's reviews came out on embargo date, and that was because fewer critics were authorized to watch it beforehand. These are the critics that saw Wonder Woman 1984 and had their reviews ready when Warner Media and Warner Brothers said, you can release your reviews. As I mentioned before, not the bulk of reviews, but they were by far the most positive reviews. When you look at the male critics, who made up about 2/3 of that pool still, they were higher on the film than even their female counterparts. Male critics rated the film at 92% on embargo date.
And this isn't impugning on the value or professionalism of these male reviewers. I liked many of them. But just that if critics were more inclusive, both in who WB decided to send the screeners to and who is hired and promoted as top critics within the field of film criticism, then the reviews probably would have more accurately reflected everyone's views of the film. And this isn't just a problem with Wonder Woman 1984, by the way. This is a recurring problem throughout all of film media that Brie Larson, Captain Marvel herself, brought up around her own film.
So earlier this week, USC Annenberg's Inclusive Initiative released findings that 67% of the top critics reviewing the 100 highest grossing movies in 2017 were white males. Less than a quarter were white women, and less than 10% were unrepresented men. Only 2.5% of those top critics were women of color. So you're probably thinking right now, like, wow, that super doesn't represent the country that I live in, and that's because that's true. This is a huge disconnect from the US population breakdown of 30% white men, 30% white women, 20% men of color, and 20% women of color.
I also saw it throughout 2020 with one of the biggest examples for me was when many black women influencers brought up that Microsoft was not giving out free Xbox Series X to women of color prior to that console's launch. Inclusiveness does not start and end within your own creative work itself, but also with who you allow your creative work to be critically engaged with and in what context you put it out into the world in. Not only does a creative work need to be inclusive after the fact, but also during the actual production of it. And I say that because after I finished the recording of this video, director Patty Jenkins went on the Mark Maron podcast and had this to say about her experience directing the first Wonder Woman movie.
I feel super lucky that everybody in the industry wanted to hire me, but I felt like they wanted to hire me like a beard. They wanted me to walk around on set being a woman director, but it was their story
right.
and their vision.
So they could go, look, we got one. There she is. Look at her.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And my ideas, they were like, oh, I don't even want to read. They wouldn't even read the script.
Right.
You know, it was such mistrust of a different way of doing things and a different point of view. Even all the way up to Wonder Woman. When I first joined Wonder Woman, it was kind of like, yeah, okay, but let's do it this other way. And I was like, that's not how women don't want to see that. And that's not her being harsh and tough and cutting people's heads off. Like that's not what I'm a Wonder Woman fan. That's not what we're looking for.
You already made one monster movie about a woman.
They were nervous that it's not viable.
Right.
They're all freaked out by the female superhero films that had failed, the smaller things that had failed. I told them what film I wanted to make.
In terms of Wonder Woman.
I said, this is not the story I think you should tell with Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to be the one to get, you know, in a fight for years about it. And so they said, no, we want to do it our way. So they tried to go do it their way. And then they came back to me a year later and said, actually, do you want to do it your way? And boom, I just went and made the movie. I want to make movies about women, but I don't want to make movies about being a woman.
Yeah.
That's so boring, you know? Like, I want to make movies about women doing all kinds of things, you know?
Right.
So people were kind of confused, but word got out that I wanted to do a superhero film. And, you know, to Marvel's credit, like on a movie that did not require a woman at all, they hired me. And so, you know, I've always been super grateful to them, even though it didn't work out.
Jenkins' words show that Warner Brothers was more interested in appearing to be diverse with Wonder Woman rather than actually doing the work to uplift and include women in the conversation of how they were actually being represented for the first time in superhero media on this level. It's things like this, as well as the clear bungling and mismanaging that Warner Brothers has done around its HBO Max platform to piss off its relationships with almost all of its filmmakers in order to appease its new owners AT&T, that make me much more apt to lay the blame for this movie, Wonder Woman 1984's problems, at the feet of Warner Brothers and the executives involved in it, rather than on Patty Jenkins. Though again, that's currently speculation on my part. Regardless though, movies like Wonder Woman 1984 and all of its flaws are what happens when instead of making media that is diverse and inclusive, you're instead focused on making, quote, virtue signaling diverse media. And I use the phrase virtue signaling as it's actually intended, not the YouTuber version of virtue signaling, meaning someone is just trying to show off that they have virtues in order to make themselves more profitable and marketable to a society that increasingly demands those things without actually doing the work to actually have those virtues. And you can see this stark difference when you compare Wonder Woman 1984 as a work of diverse but not inclusive media and Birds of Prey, where star Margot Robbie used her leverage as the film's forward-facing star to bring in and work with director Cathy Yan to make the film both diverse and inclusive. And inclusive meaning actually letting numerous voices of different backgrounds actually have a say in what is being created rather than just simply having them be there. Also, her stating that Marvel was more interested in hiring her as a director rather than hiring her as a woman director makes me much more excited for Marvel movies going forward than DC, which is sad because, again, I'm a huge DC fan. And by the way, I am not saying that every single female-led film needs to be a high-minded feminist masterpiece that smashes the patriarchy. In fact, they shouldn't be. We should see more movies where women just get to beat the crap out of bad guys like any other superhero, and more diverse women at that. It's why I love movies like The Old Guard. Yes, The Old Guard does have some things to say within it, but it's generally just a cool, diverse, beat-em-up superhero women-led movie. And I like that. Despite it not having the biggest thing to say in the world, it was just a fun superhero film that was diverse and inclusive. But Wonder Woman 1984 purports to be a film about something and pretends it's talking about real-world issues, but it doesn't want to deal with the hard work of actually saying anything meaningful with them. In fact, it actively encourages us to not deal with them and ignore them as a matter of course, because people like Diana can. They have the luxury to. Let's just say it as it is, that mirrors how many identities, even though they are part of marginalized groups, can ignore the harm of other marginalized groups. That's why we see log cabin Republicans, or TERFs for that matter. Those are groups that are part of marginalized groups, but actively work against helping others because they can actively ignore the struggles of those who have more intersecting marginalized identities. And I do hope that as we start to see more female-led superhero works like She-Hulk, Ms. Marvel, Kamala Khan, Scarlet Witch, and the next Wonder Woman movie, and hopefully another Birds of Prey movie, that female superheroes don't end up being so broad and distant that they have nothing to say. As we start to see more diverse identities, not just women, in the superhero space, I hope that means that Wonder Woman doesn't have to be a hollow symbol for all of womanhood. Diana deserves to be and say more. Alright, that's it for this video. I know this is going to be a charged topic for many. I know it's going to get kind of heated, so I would please ask that in the comments, let's not attack each other or attack creators. If you want to attack me to vent out your anger or frustration, please feel free to attack me or criticize me, especially. I would love to hear criticism of any of my thoughts in this. That's totally fine, especially if I said anything that bothered you. But let's all just assume positive intent by everyone involved in this conversation, unless we can find out otherwise, and from the filmmakers and other commentators. And that doesn't mean we don't talk about the issues at hand, but let's try and make it constructive rather than destructive. Again, like I said, this was not the video that I wanted to make, but I made it in an effort that the type of conversation that comes out of Wonder Woman 1984 in general, and my video specifically, is helpful rather than harmful to the discourse. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this. Please subscribe to my channel for any more discussions of geek culture and issues within geek culture. I also have a Patreon page that you can help me out on. I also have a podcast that you can check out. But beyond all of that, I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper. Oh, God, props to Linda Carter for doing that all the dang time, because, oof, I do not feel good. Woo! Thank you so much to all of my patrons who are helping me achieve my dream of doing this full time, and especially a thank you to Catherine Lambeth, Miranda Janelle, Ashley Allen Bokikio, Eli Bergmas, Ashlyn Solstice, Michael D., Greg Gillum, Stephen Kleinard, Chamomile T., Ulysses the Pagan, Randy Thompson, Boyd and Mary Beth Earl, Wellington Marcus, Stefan Schuhart, Wayne Twitchell, Roar, Ish the Mad, Dominic Noble, Buttoneer, John Steele, Michael Beam, Jedi Indiana Jones, William Stewart, Gavin Robinson, Nathan Olson, BBD, Amanda Ronye Adanya, The Sir Spence, Jason Knott, Hannah F., Andrew Jorgensen, Maeve, Jasmine, Skylar Gray, Sean Piper, Andrew K., Bree Beecher, Subraxis, Jane Packard and Chloe Dollar, Nathan Steele, Tiffany Danger, Mari Neckar, Wendizzle Bizzle, Bush, W. Randy Eady, Mark the Edge, Piston Twisted Garage, Geek Filter, Gretchen Badger, Polly Mina, Jean Mithune, Sarah Bystam, Lysa, Din, Jacob Tovar, Celestial Dawn, Lily, Andrew Lamoureux, Raina C., Zone 1 Librarian, Michael Hardy, Corey Honkanen and Vale Dunn, Thank you. You are all beautiful, beautiful people.